What do you get when you add NZXT's case to NZXT's AIO to NZXT's PSU to NZXT's motherboard? NZXTception? Hey everyone, Mukul here. So this video took me a long freaking time to make because whatever production quality I try to maintain here, with all the performance number I did and all the tests I did for this build, it was pretty freaking hard overall. And more than pretty freaking hard, it was a very long process because I do all of this stuff alone. I was about to say akele. But anyway, here is it finally, and I want to thank NZXT for sending me all this stuff for this build, because if they didn't, then I wouldn't have had this stuff, and then there wouldn't have been no video because there wouldn't have been any stuff to make a video on. And also a special thanks to Intel for sending me the Intel i9-11900K, because really without it, building on a Z590 platform wouldn't have been possible, and that would have also meant that for this video I would have needed to disassemble my primary system, which would have definitely sucked. The 11 series of Intel now supports PCIe Gen 4.0, and the 11900K comes with 8 cores and 16 threads with a max turbo frequency up to 5.3 GHz. Well, I was able to touch 5 GHz all-core frequency pretty easily with a moderate overclock, which I will share ahead. The case we are going to build in is the Elite 510, which is a mid-tower case, and it is white AF. The paint finish is really nice here, and I truly love the surfacing they have achieved on the case. The metal material underneath feels quite solid, and the ability to pull out filters just like that is pretty sweet. This means you won't need to attempt a hit and trial method when you install the back without tilting the case upside down. There was another filter on the front of the base which I could easily pull out from outside, but to install it back you would need to open the whole case. As I was starting the build, I didn't mind that, but in case you ever do that after the completion of a build, then there will be some free unwanted work for you by the end of it. Well, no one is going to look at the right side of the case, and maybe that's why NZXT has put this long and wide array of ventilation holes there and there only. And on the right side of the case, you would find the NZXT control hub with all the specific labels on it, denoting what those specific things specifically do. There are limited number of ports on the top, but they are nicely embossed in and look quite clean. Well, what I didn't get though was that the top rear end abruptly has these black perforations. Well, I mean, it doesn't look that bad, but they could have painted those screws white too, which could have helped it blend a bit nicely with the overall whiteness of the case. The feet on the bottom are tall and are as tall as they can be. I mean, this will definitely help your power supply and the front fans for sucking in as much air as possible, but get ready to lose a bunch of stuff and even some small frigging hands under it. The tempered side panel is hooked with just one screw, and then you need to just pull it towards yourself. Make sure that you support it as you remove it, otherwise it will crash and no one is gonna send you a free replacement. And as you can notice on the back of the case, the power supply will go on the bottom, and there is a dedicated area for mounting your GPU vertically too. Well, the NZXT Z7 Z590 motherboard is for casual users who would love a decent performance from their motherboard with a good looking white or black theme designed over it. But if you're a serious punchy overclocker, I think you already know that this isn't the board for you. And it's not like as if NZXT tried to market the motherboard as an overclocking motherboard too. But if you try and just mildly push the clocks on your chip like me, the motherboard shouldn't give you any troubles. Well, it supports both 10th and 11th gen processors from Intel with a maximum support of up to 128 GB of RAM with a max memory frequency support of 4600 MHz. The board also supports PCIe Gen 4.0, which the 11th gen Intels like too. So yeah, if you want to get in the race of achieving the fastest storage on an NVMe drive, you are most welcome to do so here. For the many ports this motherboard supports, I would leave a small note on your screen, or you can just Google about it too. And in the box you get 2 antennas, 2 M.2 screws and 2 SATA cables, and a manual which opens up like a newspaper. When it comes to how the motherboard looks, there are these huge chunks of white covers which cover the whole motherboard almost completely. Well, to be honest, it kind of looks quite bland, but I imagine with all the components installed on it, the leftover patches of whites will give a good justice to most of the white themed builds. What I really like though is how neatly they hit the NVMe heatsinks with the overall design of the motherboard. I think when they were designing this motherboard, the only motto here was to throw some whites on it and then some more whites. There are many frigging ports on the IO shield, but as you can notice, there is a limited number of SATA ports due to the limited number of PCI lanes. I really liked how the different types of screws were in their individual pouches with their type labeled on top of them. And as I was installing the motherboard in, I realized that damn, in this case you can't really add more than one fan on the top, and it's good that the case came with a 140mm top mounted fan by default. Well, all the standoff screws were already installed, so mounting the motherboard was easy peasy, and no one can really forget to install the IO Shield 2 as it was already stacked on the motherboard. Now the case manual also clearly mentioned which labeled screw will go where, so yeah, pretty seamless process so far. But make sure you have a long and thin magnetic screwdriver, otherwise putting these screws inside might feel like finding a needle in the haystack. The AIO which will go inside this build is the Kraken Z63, which is a 280mm AIO and has this beautiful 2.36-inch 24-bit color screen on it. It comes with a pair of 140mm ARP radiator fans, which are pretty darn good performers. I will make a dedicated video about the AIO separately, as I really don't want to make this video super long over something which can definitely use its own focus time. But to cut it short here, installing the pump for the Intel socket was a breeze. But as mentioned already, you can't really mount the radiator on the top, so it had to go at the front here. The biggest struggle I had to face whilst installing the radiator up front with its two fans was that with the cable bar installed at the back, it was quite impossible. So I had to remove the whole cable bar and sacrifice the look of this element which is part of the case, and then only I was able to install the two radiator fans. If the processor which is going in your build isn't going to be as thermally demanding as the 8-core Intel 11900K here, or even for example a Ryzen 5800X or a Ryzen 5900X, and if it's something of a 6-core processor which won't consume more than, let's say 110 or 120 watts of power, then you might be able to afford keeping that cable bar there and skip adding the radiator fans. But I'm someone who would always prefer installing them there no matter what chip you use. The power supply I received was the C-Series 750 watts, which is a 80+ gold certified power supply and is completely modular. It's manufactured by Seasonic and is backed with 10 years of warranty, so yeah, you don't need to sweat about their reliability. The cables came in this pouch, which can also be used as a makeup stuff bag for your girlfriend or wife, or even for yourself if you are into that kind of stuff. All of the cables supplied with the power supply had proper labels on it so that you don't get confused which side goes into the motherboard side and which side is supposed to go into the power supply side. I have done a video in the past about where the wires connect on a motherboard from a power supply, so I will link that up below in the description, as it is quite similar here too. The Elite 510 had ample freaking space inside the PSU shroud, so I had no problems installing the power supply there. The motherboard has two 8+4 pin ATX 12 volts power connectors, which denote that you can definitely push it for extreme overclocks, but I would suggest you not to. For installing a 2.5-inch SSD, you would need to pull off its casing from the back of the case, and it could definitely have been of better quality, as this is probably the only thing in the whole case which didn't feel solid so far. And to install a 3.5-inch hard drive, you have to unscrew the whole bracket and then screw the hard drive in. For the GPU, I used my one and only RTX 3080 Fe, as I literally have one GPU here. The rest of the money I have, I spend on food. On the left side of the case, I saw this connector dangling and it drove me nuts. And then I found out that it is not supposed to go anywhere. It's an extendable connector if you plan to add more RGB strips in the case. Yeah, you can say I'm pretty inexperienced with this RGB shit. I did find the topmost slit of the motherboard tray to be pretty congested though. It definitely needs some work to get the thick connectors through it. I really liked how nicely the cable management can be done on the case, even though I heavily suck at it. NZXT has definitely made sure to give you ample amounts of slits and straps to do it conveniently in the case. Well, to be honest, I really love how the overall build looks by the end. The front default lighting of these two 140mm fans looks very portal-y. The dark tempered glass makes the lighting of these fans and the LED strip of the case pretty subtle, which doesn't hurt the eyes or look sore. And now I do understand why NZXT kind of forces us to mount the radiator up front. This can primarily be of two reasons, that either NZXT wants to have this sort of signature look in all of its builds, and the other reason could be that this setup can look kinda clean overall by not trying to sandwich the thick radiator and its fan on top of the case. But anyway, this is totally subjective. The first thing I did was to install the NZXT CAM software, and it just worked seamlessly with all the components installed inside the system in this whole NZXT ecosystem. Well, except for my XPG RAMs, which were not compatible with the CAM software, so I had to install its own software separately. Well, the software felt pretty easy to use. The UI is clean and I was easily able to understand what does what here from the first use itself. There was also a list of default RGB presets if you are someone as lazy as me for the overall aesthetics of the build. And you can also customize each LED individually of the front fans and the RGB strip on the top too. The only drawback the software had was that I couldn't really maximize it to get more real estate for all the features it offers. Alongside monitoring which fans is running at what speeds, you can also adjust the curves of each and every fan and the pump speed here too. I couldn't really find the curves adjustment features graphically in the BIOS, so this is where you got to do it. You can choose whether the fan curve should react to CPU temperatures or the GPU temperatures, but I think most of us will not change anything here. The C series power supply doesn't support the power monitoring in the CAM software, so if you need that, you got to buy the E series. The motherboard also came with the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi 6E antennas, so you can use them too. The speeds from the Wi-Fi from my basic 5 GHz router was fine at a good distance of about 30 feet. And it was also pretty easy to just flash the BIOS update from Windows itself. I did some overclocking on the board and I was able to push 5 GHz all-core performance easily via the BIOS. Just make sure you remove the power limits and max current range to these settings if you want to try them. Otherwise, no matter what you do, the clocks will keep dropping after a while. If you're someone who is scared of tweaking stuff in BIOS, you can also try the Intel Performance Maximizer, which is an auto overclocking software by Intel themselves. With it, I was able to get 4.9 GHz all-core performance. Well, on the stock settings of the CPU, I was able to get a multi-core score of 14,300 in Cinebench R23 test with an average temperature of 65.7 degrees Celsius and with an average power consumption of 153 watts. And when I ran the chip at 4.9 GHz to all-core performance, after some moderate overclocking, the score increased to 15,700 with an average temperature of 79 degrees Celsius and with an average power consumption of 205 watts. Then I decided to push the thermals more and check how the case performs. And for that, I ran Furmark and Cinebench R23 together at the same time with the processor overclocked to 5 GHz all-core this time. And the temperatures did cross 90 degrees Celsius this time for the CPU, and the GPU reached till 83 degrees, which is quite typical for the RTX 3080 FE I've used in the bench. But the ambient temperatures had reached 32.7 degrees Celsius by now. And you gotta understand that this chip and the RTX 3080 together were churning about 570 watts of power, which is definitely no walk in the park. Well, to be honest, even the phrase walk in the park is not easy for me because I don't get up early for any sort of walks in the parks. During the superposition test, which stresses the GPU mostly and kind of replicates what games do to our system, the GPU temperatures didn't cross 82 degrees Celsius, which is again quite typical for the RTX 3080 FE. The motherboard temperatures didn't cross 51 degrees Celsius throughout these tests. The noise levels were moderately audible at Performance Fan Curves preset, as there are 3 140mm fans in the case, which can get quite fast, so a moderate sound level was already expected. But in my regular testing and with the fan over the top of my head, it wasn't much audible. Well, I have noticed that a lot of people curse on this case because of its bad ventilation, supposedly bad ventilation, and the inability to keep the components inside cool. But in my testing and looking at all these results, I was pretty much satisfied and I can't really claim it to be bad at all. I mean, you have to make sure that you add a good 280mm AIO up front, even if it's not the NZXT Kraken Z63, it can be anything else, but it should be a good AIO. As I've observed that a lot of people miss on this crucial fact and they go with some 240mm AIOs, and even I've seen some people go with an air cooler for this case. Well, if you're going to use a 4-core processor or a 6-core processor, you might be able to use an air cooling in this case, but apart from anything else, if it's an 8-core CPU which can easily produce, let's say, 150, 160 watts of power, then you are better off with a 280mm AIO. Now, only if NZXT launches their NZXT BLD program here in India too, the ease of custom building an NZXT PC will definitely get them more buyers. Well, at least those buyers who can afford a system like this easily. But I'm not sure if it's in the works or not, but hopefully they will consider it. So am I done? I hope I am. Well, thanks for watching the video completely if you are seeing this message too. And I will be completing the video of Kraken Z63 soon with more benchmarks in it, of course. Not these numbers again. Otherwise, it will be dumb. I will post some of the affiliate links of these components below. So if you just feel like supporting me, you can buy some of the stuff from there also. Or you can also show some support by subscribing or hopping onto our Discord for more chit chats on relevant content. So yeah, stay safe humans. That's all for today. Mewbot out. NZXTception. I'm still not sure if it was a good joke or not.